Hello, and Christ is in our midst. Today, I'd like to talk about what happened with John the Baptist after Jesus was baptized. We're still in the period of Theophany, Epiphany, celebrating the baptism of Jesus. But what happened after this baptism took place? Well, with John, we know that something terrible actually happened. He was arrested by the ruler of the area called Herod. Sometimes he's called King Herod. And he was arrested and put into prison. Now, why was he put into prison? Well, Herod had done something very bad. He was married to somebody, and then he went on a long trip to Rome, and he saw someone else, actually his niece, named Herodias, and he decided he wanted to marry her instead. And so he divorced his wife, who was back in Palestine, and married Herodias instead. Now, Herodias was his own brother's wife, his brother Philip. So here's Herod divorcing his wife, taking his brother's wife, and moving back to Palestine, to Galilee, where he was the ruler. And John the Baptist said, this is not the way for a ruler to behave. In fact, it's not the way for anybody to behave. And John was not afraid of speaking the truth to King Herod. And this annoyed Herod a lot. And it also annoyed Herodias, the woman he had taken. And this anger that they both had was in their heart for a very long time. And so Herodias insisted that John be arrested and put in prison. While he was in prison, what Herod really wanted to do was to kill John, to get him completely out of the way. But he was afraid of the people because the crowds of people were following John and they honored John. You remember that lots and lots of people came out to John to be baptized. They went into the Jordan River. So he was a well-known figure. So Herod was afraid of killing him at that time. But one day, it was Herod's birthday, and on his birthday, he was drinking a lot of alcohol, a lot of wine, and he got very drunk, and Herodias' daughter, named Salome, came and danced in front of the whole crowd of guests at his big birthday party. And Herod was so drunk, and he was so pleased with the way that Salome had danced, that he told her, "Ask me anything you want, I'll give it to you as a reward for your wonderful dancing." Well, before she would answer him, she went and talked to her mother, Herodias, and said, "What should I ask?" And immediately, Herodias said, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Now, when she asked Herod this, he was at first afraid, but he was also ashamed to go against his word. This is one time where if you make a really bad promise, you should break that promise. You should not keep your word when you say something that really is wrong. But he was too proud and he was too ashamed to go back on his word. And so he gave the order for a guard to go into the prison and to take a sword and to cut off John the Baptist's head. And the guard brought that head in on a platter and presented it to Salome, and Salome gave it to her mother Herodias. Well, that was a terrible, terrible end to the life and ministry of John the Baptist. But one more thing I wanted to say is that Herod, as the ruler, had given a very terrible order. But he'd also learned from his father. His father was also Herod, who was also the king, and it was his father, King Herod, who was the one who had sent the soldiers to Bethlehem to kill all the children who were 2 years old and under when Jesus was born, because he didn't want any conflict with anybody who might say that they were a king, even if it was an infant, a child, like the baby Jesus. So the father, King Herod, had given bad orders, wrong orders. The son, King Herod, had given a very wrong order for the imprisonment and killing of John the Baptist. And it shows us that rulers can sometimes give very wrong orders, do bad things. In this country, we ourselves have seen in this past week the storming of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you've seen some of those things on television. When a leader, even a president, gives an order that's wrong, we have to say no. And your job is to be able to think, to say yes or no, to decide when it is that you should follow an order. And if someone ever gives you an order that you know in your heart is wrong, that's violent, that's wrong, it's your duty to say, no, I'm not going to do that. So rulers are placed in position in order to serve the common good, as I've told you before. But if they don't serve that common good, then your job is to say no. And John the Baptist gives us a good example of saying no to rulers when they're wrong. And it's difficult, and you can see how difficult it is, because John suffered because of it. But that's the calling that we all have, to follow the truth and to speak the truth when we're called upon to do so. Christ is in our midst.